Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo tells us America is a force for good in the Middle East. Well, that's pretty amazing. And online censoring continues apace. Also, are the Democrats the party of war now? Cross-talking some real news. I'm joined by my guest here in Moscow, Mark Slobodka. He's an international affairs and security analyst. We also have Dmitry Babich. He's a political analyst with Sputnik International. And in London, we cross to Marcus Papadopoulos. He's the editor of Politics First magazine. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Let me go to Marcus in London. We have Mike Pompeo on his tour in the Middle East. He gave a wide-ranging, if very confusing, speech in Cairo. Essentially, he's blaming American foreign policy in the Middle East on Barack Obama, while at the same time talking about the same three issues: Iran, Iran, and Iran. What's your takeaway from the Secretary of State's tour?
Yes, I read the transcript of his speech, and I found it a most peculiar one. But I think I can partly explain it. I think that Mr. Pompeo is trying to reassure America's key allies in the Middle East, and of course they are Israel, Saudi Arabia, and to a lesser extent, Egypt, that America, despite having lost in its objective in Syria, is not walking away from the Middle East, is not a weakened force in the Middle East. Now, of course, there is a lot of truth to that, because as I said moments ago, the American objective in Syria has been defeated, and has been defeated in large measure because of Russia. But at the same time, since Mr. Trump became president, of course, America's ties to its two most crucial allies in the region, Israel and Saudi Arabia, have been enhanced greatly. Yeah. Let us not forget, Trump has now recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And of course, Trump has signed defense contracts with Saudi Arabia to the tune of something like $500 billion or $600 billion. So yes, it's a strange speech, because we all know, or people on this planet at least know, that America is a great force for destruction and instability in the Middle East. But I think because the Americans have been defeated in Syria, they need to reassure their allies. And also, as you said, Peter, I do fear for Iran, because I believe with Trump in office, this represents an opportunity in a lifetime for those on Capitol Hill who want to overthrow the Iranian government. And perhaps something will happen under Mr. Trump's tenure in the White House. Yeah, we'll talk about how the Democrats and the media reacted to the speech as well. Mark, what was your takeaway from the speech? Because if we, and I agree with Marcus in London, is it so bad that Pompeo has to reassure people?
Yeah. First of all, without disagreeing with the substance, just a slight correction on the numbers. Trump has signed roughly around $300 billion worth of deals with Saudi Arabia.
But there's a lot of other deals in the pipeline from the past.
However, 90-some% of those are actually Obama-era deals that were just re-signed. So it's just about $600 billion. Yeah. It's about $600 billion. Yeah. It's about $600 billion. But anyway. Pompeo opened up his speech with this little bit that I found very interesting. In my office, I keep a Bible open on my desk to remind me of God and His Word to the truth. And then he said, it's the truth with a lowercase t that I'm here to talk about. And then he went on to say, America is a force for good in the Middle East. Now, there's nothing, of course, wrong with him having a Bible on his desk, but he's giving a speech in a Muslim-majority country to the Muslim world. And he opens this. I felt that he was an evangelist, that a tent revivalist. I half expected him to suddenly pull out a group of snakes and start twirling around in circles, yelling, America's a force for good, America is a force for good, as the snakes bit his head off, I guess. Yeah, it was absolutely bizarre speech. even across the Middle East, even among these supposed U.S. allies, and we're talking about the Gulf dictatorships here, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, they were embarrassed by this. They were offended and insulted by this speech. And I mean, there's just so many weird statements in it.
I know.
When he said at one point that in World War II, American GIs were there to free North America, we assume he meant North Africa, from Nazi Germany. Would Russia and China come to your rescue? Well, Russia and China, of course, fought in World War II, and it was Russia that defeated Nazi Germany in Berlin.
Well,
so
and also, Dima, interestingly enough, it's the American media doesn't like to talk about it. Certainly, Mike Pompeo doesn't like to talk about it. But there is a peace process going on to finally resolve the issues in Syria, and it's being led by Russia. Mike Pompeo doesn't realize it or doesn't want to recognize it. Go ahead.
Well, indeed, and this process is pretty successful because basically the Constitutional Commission is working. Most likely there will be negotiations in Geneva. The fighting in Syria is now much less than just a few months ago. And obviously, you have Russia, Turkey, Iran working on one side, and you have Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States very jealous.
It's very complicated because you could put Turkey in both camps simultaneously.
But talking about Pompeo's speech, you know, it was strange. When I read some of the sentences from it, I thought, oh, Jesus, he's starting to say it now. You know, like when he said, our choices, the choices that we make, have consequences for other countries. I thought, Jesus, yes, yes. He's going to talk about destroyed, cities in Iraq. He's going to talk about Libya, about Syria. He's going to repent. Oh, no, no, no. The choices of not interfering is bad, you know, according to Pompeo. Then he says, the results of Obama's misjudgments have been dire. I'm like, oh, yes, yes. He made a mistake when he supported the insurgency in Syria. Pompeo is going to say, no. He did not support the rebellion in Iran. Jesus. So it was not enough for us. The war in Syria, the war in Iraq, the war in Libya. Pompeo wanted us to have a war in Iran
Another takeaway from it is that Western meddling is good, it's moral, it's virtuous, but Russian meddling alleged in the United States is evil.
Yes.
Again, I find
and
it
not
very
enough Western meddling is also evil.
The thing is that I see this pattern over and over again, this lack of self-reflection, of actually looking at your own words here. Let me go back to Marcus in London and change gears a little bit here. Glenn Greenwald came out with an excellent article at The Intercept. As Democratic elites reunite with neocons, the party's voters are becoming far more militaristic and pro-war than Republicans. I never thought I would read a headline like that. It's an excellent article. I think our viewers should take a look at it. But we have a historical shift here. Or maybe we don't. Is it just out of spite because Trump has talked about during the campaign and during his presidency about withdrawing troops from Syria for sure, Afghanistan, rethinking possibility of American troops in Iraq? I mean, this is something that his base likes. Public opinion polls show it. But because Trump is for it, the Democrats in the liberal media are against it. What's going on here? Marcus?
Well, I don't think there's been any shift. And certainly in my lifetime, the Democrats have been as pro-war as the Republicans. Let's not forget, in the 1990s, how Bill Clinton, for example, facilitated the arrival of the Mujahideen to Bosnia during the civil war there, and the Mujahideen enacted some of the most appalling atrocities of the 20th century against Bosnian Serbs. Let's not forget how Bill Clinton gave the order for NATO to start bombing Serbia for 3 months. And Mark was talking earlier about how Pompeo was referring to the Bible. Well, at the beginning of 1999, Bill Clinton, Peter, was sitting in the Oval Office, and he asked God, shall I bomb Serbia? And guess what God said? Yes.
Yeah, I guess just like George W. Bush was talking to God about Iraq.
That's what the other phone in the Oval Office is for. It's a straight line to God.
Yes, absolutely. So in my opinion, the Democrats and the Republicans, when it comes to foreign policy, they are two sides of the same coin. They have no respect for the United Nations Charter. They have no respect for international law. And I think, the Democrats have proven their commitment to war over the last 20 years. I
want to go back, and we can take a look. Our viewers can take a look at the article. The point is that polling data shows that the Democrats are more pro-war than Republicans. Though I suppose it's to one degree or another. Both are interventionist, both support American exceptionalism. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, so the numbers show that as of right now, some 49 to 33%, the majority of Americans support Trump's withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria. And the vast majority of that 33% is Democrats. And almost identical, we see very similar numbers with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Here's the problem. Just a few years ago, when it was Obama campaigning on withdrawing troops from Afghanistan, which he ran on and then actually surged troops into, Democrats were overwhelmingly supporting withdrawing all troops from Afghanistan, and Republicans were against it.
So explain, 40 seconds.
Partisanship. The explanation is
how does Trump play into this?
How does Trump play into this? Because Republican voters as a whole, there's always specifics, support whatever Trump says. When Trump was launching airstrikes into Damascus on the pretext of chemical weapons, Republicans supported that. Right? So, but I think there is a long-term shift with the neocons gravitating to control both parties directly now. When we have woke Bill Kristol and Robert Kagan supporting Hillary Clinton and so on. And this may not be reversible. This may have a longer trend than partisanship in both
So the neocon cancer on the Republican Party is just migrated to the Democrats. Okay, I'm going to jump in here, gentlemen. We're going to go to a short break. And after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on some real news. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing some real news. Okay, let me go to Dima now. Let's change gears. We see online censorship gaining a pace here. We have this NewsGuard app that will basically tell the consumer of news sites what's truthful news, real news, as opposed to fake news. But if you look at the background of these people here, I mean, this is a combination of old media, traditional media, and deep state figures determining what news is all about. Is it trustworthy in your mind? Because obviously, the New York Times gets a passing grade, but of course the television station that we're on right now doesn't.
Well, I mean, these people from the so-called heritage media, legacy media, they have been exposed, even in the last 2 months. Just look at all of these stories. The sound attack against the American diplomats in Cuba was actually produced by insects, right?
Crickets.
Crickets. In Ukraine, they supported the regime, which, surprise, surprise, added Stepan Bandera's birthday, on the 1st of January. They made it a national celebration day. It's one of the most important anniversaries.
And a Nazi collaborator.
The Nazi collaborator, absolutely. The head of the Ukrainian nationalists who destroyed tens of thousands of Jews in Kiev alone. And this was reported by the New York Times. The New York Times published an opinion piece by Eduard Dalinsky, the head of the Ukrainian Jewish Committee, who exposed it, but the newspaper and the regime in the United States continues to support Poroshenko, President Poroshenko of Ukraine and his regime. So they have been exposed so many times, but they continue to say that other guys are dangerous. The same story with France and Germany. In France, suddenly, there are more yellow vests. This last Saturday, there were more yellow vests than at the previous one. Who is to blame? Russia. Russia. The same story with Germany. We hear calls in first Germany and France. They have also introduced very tough laws controlling the internet. The representatives of the alternative parties are the first victims in both France and Germany. And these guys, they just cannot admit that their ideology can be wrong. It's always Russia or Zuckerberg did not notice something. He let these Russians, he let these Venezuelans, he let these Iranians post their messages there. This is obviously a terrible crime.
Let me, Marcus, this is a continuing trend here that we saw with Alex Jones, which I'm not a big fan of, but I think that he should have a platform, and many, many others here. This seems like a second wave. This NewsGuard wants to basically monopolize the American market, presumably to be rolled out on a global scale. So this is going to be 2019 is going to be another bad year for free speech. Go ahead, Marcus in London.
Well, let's approach this new app as a proper court of law would. And I have two questions to pose. Number one, who owns this app? What is their background, or what are their backgrounds? And number two, who will decide what is trustworthy or not? Now, these are two critical questions which have to be addressed and have to be answered. But as we all know, Peter, for many, many years now, there has been a concerted campaign in both America and Britain to denigrate Russia and the Russian people, and to denigrate those commentators in the public eye inside Russia and outside of Russia who show more open-mindedness when it comes to Russian foreign policy objectives. For example, what's happened in Ukraine, what's happened in Syria. If we just have a look in Britain, it has been revealed in the last few weeks about the Institute for Statecraft, the Integrity Initiative, British government-funded projects which have been designed, which have been established to do exactly what I said just now, to denigrate Russia and to denigrate those people in the public eye who challenge the British and American narratives when it comes to Russia or Ukraine or Syria. So yes, these are very, very dark times. And when we see newspapers in Britain and America saying that RT, for example, is controversial, or crosstalk is controversial, well, I always pose this question. Who defines what controversial is? And secondly, who applies the word controversial? Now, all you need to do is a bit of research and you will see that the people who define the word controversial in the context of RT, the people who apply the word controversial in the context of RT, have it in for RT. So they're not impartial whatsoever.
Yeah, right, exactly. You know, Mark, it's a very insidious marriage between the deep state and journalists that have abandoned the profession in the way that I would understand being a journalist here. I mean, this is just a mechanism to shut down free speech at all costs, okay?
Yeah, absolutely, to support the official establishment narrative. And they claim that they have real journalists and editors doing what they call fact-checking, right? But the connections with the U.S. deep state are obvious. First of all, they're partnering, this is huge, NewsGuard is partnering with Microsoft on this. They are fighting to get this installed in schools, public libraries, universities. They want this mandatory on every mobile phone and computer sold in the United States. They want Facebook and Twitter to start using them as well. They've got a color-coded system, right?
So we're red, okay?
Fox News and Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, the U.S. propaganda network are green. RT, CGTN, right? Those are red. They're bad. And they're rolling out a brand guard as well that goes out with this. And what it's doing is attempting to force companies to stop using advertising online that many alt media sources, like say Mint Press and others, rely on ad revenues in order to help generate funds on their paper-thin budget. But there's all kinds of connections. First of all, the founders of NewsGuard are linked to all kinds of neocon think tanks like the Heritage Foundation and the American Enterprise Institute, and on their list of advisors, for how this is set up. Who are the advisors telling NewsGuard what news is good and what is bad? Michael Hayden, the former director of the CIA and the NSA, both, right? You also have Richard Stengel on there, right? Just to show the bipartisanship of it. He was an Obama-era official. He was an undersecretary, I believe, in the State Department for the Obama administration. And he famously said, "Many people call me Obama's chief chief propagandist, and then he went on in a Council of Foreign Relations discussion, right, in front of cameras to say that he's all in favor of targeting propaganda, in those words, propaganda against the American people. And he's the one who's going to be advising NewsGuard on what's real news and what's not.
Is this going to work? I mean, when I was growing up, there was a nice saying, is that, if you push the toothpaste out of the tube, you can't get it back in. Have publics been exposed to an open sources on the internet well enough for these state-supported actors to start contracting it? I mean, what would be the reaction here? My attitude is that when I'm on Facebook, I can see what a fake story is, when it's a fake story, when someone puts it on, okay? I mean, you have an intuitive sense here, and I think most people that are interested in news have an intuitive sense. I think we have to trust the individual here. Is this form of censorship, is it going to destroy what we understand as the internet?
We know that media can fuel hatred more than actual acts, And I think this is a modern-day racism when you declare a certain group of people simply non-eligible for a certain activity. Like there was racism against Russian athletes. They can't compete at the Olympic Games. You can't even speak Russian there. You can't show Russian flag, even in the audience. The same story with the media. Let me quote what the French President Macron said last year about RT and Sputnik, without referring to them by name, but he said, addressing the French journalists, there are some people who imitate your speech, your manners, your formats, but they are not you. And we have to deal with all of that. So it's just amazing, He is basically saying that there are certain people posing as journalists, but because they object to him, they are not journalists. And this is the reason why French people showed such huge opposition to Macron. I think even the British, even the Germans don't understand this. They all expected the Yellow Vest protest to die down. Why they didn't die down? Because Macron doesn't learn anything, Yeah. He divides people into friends and enemies enemies are dehumanized, Enemies, they just imitate journalist formats. Enemies, you can meet them at the train station, as he says. You can meet at the train station successful people like me who did something in life, and you may meet absolute nobodies. So, it is this kind of attitude that makes people angry and drives them to the alternative media.
Obviously, and that's why they're in the streets. Marcus, let me go back to you in London. I would just take what Dima Babic had to say and kind of invert it here. In my lifetime, I think about, before the internet, some really great journalists, great television journalists, great writers and all that. But today, they're just basically stenographers for power. I don't see a whole lot of quality journalism. It's always the reference is to power. I suppose that makes you rich and it makes you famous. You get celebrity. But they're just peddling a message here. So to criticize me because of where I work, to invalidate that is exactly what Dima Babic is saying here. I mean, it's basically people that have that opinion invalidate journalism as a profession. Go ahead, Marcus in London.
Yes, let me be candid and I suppose brutally candid about these people in America and Britain who masquerade as journalists. They are not, of course, proper journalists, certainly not in our definition of what makes a journalist. It is my view that they fall into one or two categories, or perhaps both categories. The first category, I would describe them as ideologically driven foot soldiers of the American establishment and the British establishment. These people, Peter, genuinely believe in the necessity of Western global dominance. They believe in that as much as we believe it is important for Russia to be a superpower.
Marcus, we're almost out of time. What's the second category? We're almost out of time. What's the second category you said?
Well, quite simply, money talks. Money makes the world go round. And certainly when it comes to the Institute for Statecraft, we now know many of these people have
it's the business model here. All right, I have to jump in here, gentlemen. Many thanks to my guests here in Moscow and in London. This is the end of our broadcast segment. Stay with us for the extended version on our YouTube channel. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules. Now for the extended version of our program where we have political potpourri. I will volunteer to go first here. Came across a fascinating article on The Hill by Janusz Bugalski titled Managing Russia's Disillusion. And this is an amazing thing to come out into such a well-known online publication. It's basically about how to destroy the sovereign state of Russia, a member of the United Nations, a member of the United Nations Security Council, and this is almost like political pornography in reading it, but I will read one segment here, and this will give you the flavor of it all. Quote, some regions, meaning of Russia, some regions could join countries such as Finland, Ukraine, China, and Japan, and for Moscow has forcibly appropriated territories in the past. Other republics in the North Caucasus, Middle Volga, Siberia, and the Far East could become fully independent states and forge relations with China, Japan, the U.S., and Europe. Dima, I mean, it's breathtaking.
Amazing.
Breathtaking.
I mean, just imagine how the American press, how Mueller's commission would react if a journalist in Russia wrote something like this. Some Russian regions, such as Sakha and Magadan, are actually richer than average. They have their own substantial mineral wealth, so they could become successful states without Moscow's exploitation, end of quote. Imagine me saying, well, you know, Texas could be the world's 11th economy without the United States. You can imagine the reaction. So these people, they have not just a double, they have a tribal standard, you know. And it's interesting that Janusz Bugalski, who is obviously of Polish origin, he didn't include Poland in the number of countries that can take Russian regions forcefully, you know, taken by Russia before, away from them. So he's so generous. Dear Janusz, thank you for leaving us at least.
Poland wasn't so generous when they were breaking up Czechoslovakia. Okay.
Absolutely. They snatched their part of the so-called Terzin, or Zaolzhye, as they call it, in 1938. And the first country to declare war on Poland in 1939 after Nazi Germany was Slovakia, because it had been treated in that way by Poland.
Let's go back to London. Marcus, I'm sure you read that article. What was your reaction to it? I mean, it's, you know, Western meddling in Russia is fine. It is commendable. It is morally right. But they go on for 2 years about this fictitious conspiracy of Russian meddling in the 2016 election.
Well, let me say two things about that article. Yes, it was a very unpleasant, it made for a very unpleasant read, but of course it wasn't surprising. I think anyone who has an intimate knowledge of the historical relations between Russia and Britain, Russia and America, will not be surprised, because of course, certainly in the case of Britain, over centuries, Britain has done everything it possibly could to undermine Russia, when Russia was Tsarist, when Russia was communist, and of course in modern day times as well. And I will never forget, Peter, in the summer of 2000, I came across a copy of The Economist magazine, which is a wretched publication, and there was an article in it, and it said why Russia should evacuate itself from the Caucasus. So I've never forgotten that. But, you know, in regard to the allegation that Russia has meddled in America 2 years ago, or nearly 3 years ago, well, you know, Peter, when I hear about a bully or a murderer who is suffering in life, I have no sympathies for those people whatsoever. Am I really expected to show shock and horror and sadness if Russia allegedly meddled in America? We're talking about America, the greatest violator of international law, the greatest violator of the United Nations Charter in the world. They have caused abject pain and suffering for millions upon millions of people around the world. And all of a sudden, we're expected to feel sorry for them because Russia may have interfered in the American 2016 presidential election. And I say may because, as far as I'm concerned, no concrete evidence has been put forward so far.
There's ample evidence that the U.S. meddled in the 1996 presidential election in Russia. Mark, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Tulsi Gabbard,
good.
The three-term congresswoman from Hawaii, declared her candidacy for president, supposedly running on the Democratic Party, although I think she'll find far more opposition among the Democrats than she will among anything else right now, with their current bent towards the neocon side. And she's a former military. She seems to tick off all the Democratic boxes. She's young, she's female, and she's minority, right? She is a devout Hindu.
And Samoan
yes, of Samoan, right, and ancestry, and she served in the U.S. Marines. She's an Iraq War veteran, but the Democrats, of course, the Democratic Party is horrified that she's running. There's a lot of presentation of her as a anti-war candidate, and I'll talk about why that is exactly wrong. Tulsi Gabbard is a hawk, but she made as a center point of why she's choosing to run. She says a center point is the issue of war and peace. She talked about other things, healthcare, climate change, but center is war and peace. And the problem is that Tulsi Gabbard is an anti-regime change, anti-hegemony candidate. And she summed up her own views on this very well. She doesn't mean that she's a pacifist by any stretch of the imagination. In short, when it comes to the war against terrorists, I'm a hawk. When it comes to counterproductive wars of regime change, I'm a dove. And that was in 2016. About what the recent events in Syria over the last couple of years, she noted, bad enough that the U.S. has not been bombing al-Qaeda in Syria, and the U.S. never seriously fought al-Qaeda in Syria, and in fact they illegally armed, trained, and salaried tens of thousands of fighters that were literally embedded and allied with al-Qaeda and well knew it. But it's mind-boggling that we protest Russia's bombing of these terrorists. Right there. She also went to Syria, of course, and infamously met Syria's government. And she supported, she has supported Trump administration, well, Trump, not Trump administration, but Trump's efforts to get out of the war in Syria. In fact, she was even briefly considered for U.S. Department of State, whether that was real or not. But the truth is that Tulsi Gabbard is anti-regime change. She's anti-neocon. She's anti-hegemony. But she's also anti-Wahhabist. She's anti-Wahhabist jihadism, and she's been proclaimed as an Islamophobe and an Assad apologist and Putin's puppet because of it.
When I came across when the story broke that she was running, it was actually the first thing that came to my mind is that she may be, if she were to go into the general election, if she'd got the nomination, that she might want to pick off some of the Trump supporters that voted for Trump because he said he would withdraw from these interventions around the world. I mean, I don't think she's going to get that far, but there would be a competition for that segment of the population. To what degree it tipped the scales, we may know one day, but there's certainly an element that, of voters that do support and we know that from public opinion polls after all of the mainstream media attacked Trump for his withdrawal of announcement to withdraw from Syria. Public opinion polls showed a small margin. Yes, that they were for.
She needs to forget the establishment Democrat and Republican parties. Tulsi Gabbard, Rand Paul, independent ticket, 2020.
What I can say is that she will have sympathetic voices in Russia. Why? Because Russians are always ready to give a benefit, give a benefit of the doubt.
Well, she should hope that no one in Russia's words are going to be used against her.
The truth is that a lot of Russians, justifiably or not justifiably, are still very sympathetic towards the United States, towards the UK, Europe, the West in general. And the reason why there were so many sympathetic voices about Trump in Russia, it was not because people knew him or admired his policies. It was just a change. Maybe this guy will be different. After all, the United States is not a bad country. That is the prevailing feeling in Russia. So we're expecting someone who can really make a change. That's why Tulsi Gabbard may be popular here.
Any Russian that thinks that way, we should, and I'm going to end on this note here, is that it's not about Obama, it's not about Clinton, it's not about Trump. It's about American exceptionalism.
Absolutely.
That is the problem here. That's all the time we have for our extended version of our program. We hope you've enjoyed it. We'll see you next week. And remember, crosstalk rules.